Welcome everyone to the RPG Goblin. In today's episode, we are going to be exploring Pathfinder 1st Edition. And I am so excited because we get to talk about the differences that Pathfinder 1st Edition brings to that classic fantasy, along with the diverse and interesting world that Pathfinder has created for its original setting that I absolutely loved learning about. And our guest for today's episode is Jeph from Big Campaign Stories podcast, which is a Pathfinder 1st Edition actual play podcast. We end up talking about a bunch of things Pathfinder, and we also have some general TTRPG talk, because we can't help it, about traditions in TTRPGs and how the role of a game master was viewed back in the day and how that is kind of changing in the TTRPG space. So if that sounds great and you're ready to start listening about what Pathfinder 1st Edition is, make sure to get comfortable and let's get into it. Welcome everyone to the RPG Goblin. I am your host Willow, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking all about Pathfinder 1st Edition, which is really, really exciting because I have my roots of getting into TTRPGs through D&D, and if you've heard of D&D, you've probably heard of Pathfinder. And that is one of the games that I think most people, since a lot of the OGL things have happened, has kind of gone to. So we're going to be talking about that today and see what Pathfinder 1st Edition is all about. And for this episode, I brought on a guest, Jeph, from the Big Campaign Stories podcast. Jeph, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jeph. I'm the GM of the podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Big Campaign Pod or on Instagram at the same. Yeah, that's where you can find us. We also do have a YouTube channel for people that enjoy podcasts that way.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm very, very excited. I haven't had a chance to check out your podcast, but I'm very excited to do that because I'm going to just make a whole day where I just start binging like a bunch of episodes from a bunch of different podcasts because I've found so many cool ones. And I think we were first able to get connected when you responded to one of my tweets. And that was super, super awesome. So I'm so glad that we were able to get to do this. And I think the first question to actually get this episode started is, what is Pathfinder?
Well, Pathfinder, first edition at least, is, let's see here, kind of filled the role when Wizards went from 3.5 to 4th edition. Sadly, they tried during 4th edition to pull one of these OGL things again. It didn't work out too well for them then either. And so a lot of people end up going to Pathfinder, which mimicked a lot of the style, build, math of D&D 3.0 and 3.5, providing you with tons of classes. It was also, I think, one of the first big ones to really bring in archetypes, which we later see came back in 5th edition with the specializations everyone has at 3rd level.
Subclasses and so forth?
Yeah, but Pathfinder is, at this point now, onto their 2nd edition, which is an absolutely wonderful system. I highly recommend people give that a shot if you're looking for something a little bit different, from kind of different but similar. But as far as 1st edition goes, it's absolutely filled to the brim with classes, variant forms of classes, over 1,000 feats. There's so much material. It definitely is a game that's designed a bit for people to show off system mastery, which can be a little daunting for new players, and definitely lends itself to our favorite player at the table, the min-maxer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Pathfinder, when you hear about it, you always think super crunchy, lots of rules, things like that. Is this a misconception or?
Sadly, no. Pathfinder and even Pathfinder 2nd edition are absolutely filled to the brim with rules, which has its pluses and minuses, of course. If it's too vague, puts too much pressure on the dungeon master or the game master to adjudicate a lot of things that maybe they shouldn't have to. Versus, if it's too crunchy, it stifles some creativity and kind of how players can interact, because if there's a rule for everything, if you're not playing by those rules, then some people get frustrated with kind of the with what rule of cool versus rules is written, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where people, if they're super into the rules, it is a little harder to get into that creativity. So I'm curious, with your time of playing Pathfinder 1st edition, how long has that been?
Let's see here. I would want to say at this point, We've been using that framework for about 12 years now.
Oh, wow. Very nice.
Okay, yeah. It should be about 12 years.
That's amazing. So, how have you found the crunch of Pathfinder First Edition to be compared to something like D&D Fifth Edition, since that will be a common touchstone, since that's what everyone's pretty much familiar with?
Yeah, I personally really enjoy the crunch. I find having a lot of those rules kind of at least looked at or designed allows a lot of freedom on my side as the GM.
Mhm.
Because with this framework in place, I can take away things that don't make sense, and there's still a strong enough body underneath that you're not ruining the core rules.
Absolutely.
Versus, like, there's a lot of very specific, I think, power issues, like in 5th edition, where if you do modify something and it falls outside of kind of what's already provided, it becomes a dangerous kind of unknown for how well it'll affect or how it will affect the campaign it's in.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I am curious, because there are two editions of Pathfinder, First Edition and Second Edition. People will always have their favorites, but I'm curious, since it seems like you have played Second Edition with how you praised it, why First Edition over Second Edition? Second Edition for your podcast?
Yeah, I wanted to go with something that my players were all really familiar with.
Mhm.
We tried very hard on the podcast to narrate things like combat and narrate our way through what would normally be rules, so
Mhm.
that if you know the system well, you know exactly what we're doing and making sure we're doing it according to the rules. But if you don't, it's not needed to know all the plethora of crunch behind it to understand how someone moves, attacks, and does something.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I did say I I find that because my players and because I know the rules well enough, it allows us to stay very fluid. Versus, I think Pathfinder 2e is incredibly well designed. I've enjoyed every time being a player. I have not GM'd it yet. For that, there's a couple great podcasts out there I recommend checking out: Dice of Thunder and Dying Five.
Oh yeah, Dying Five, which we actually have an episode of Pathfinder Second Edition with them coming out.
Oh, excellent!
Yeah, it should be after this one, so look forward to that. But yeah, it's very interesting to hear the differences between the two and how they are very similar, but it does seem that Pathfinder Second Edition did branch out from First Edition quite a bit.
Mhm.
Though it seems so. The base idea of what kind of stories Pathfinder is good at seems to have stayed the same, which are sort of high fantasy, like, going from no one to a hero within a full campaign, and all of that seems to be kind of the base of Pathfinder and D&D and those kinds of fantasy games, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Pathfinder, both first and second edition, were definitely designed in that style that D&D kind of was. Of you start by killing rats, and by level 20, you're fighting God.
Only natural.
Yeah, the natural progression of things. Um, yeah, and I think you can do other things with though. I think you can tell other stories
Mhm.
using Pathfinder. That it requires a lot more modification, and also requires like a willingness and understanding of your players as well.
Absolutely.
Like the podcast we have, our campaign, because we've been playing together so long, has gone through various iterations, starting at D&D 3.0 and eventually becoming Pathfinder. But timeline wise, now we're playing in more of a modern Snow Crash, Blade Runner kind of world.
Ooh.
Magic's a lot less common, though it's still, there's still wizard colleges and things like that. But most people, deal with the big corporations and things of that nature. And so I think we can tell that story using Pathfinder pretty well. And my players lean definitely into this is supposed to be a little bit dystopian, a little bit anti-corporate. And so I think you can still tell those non-grandiose adventure stories. You just have to be able to slow down kind of what you're hoping to achieve.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I would say if we're bringing in Paizo to all this, like, I think Starfinder is also a very fun system. I've GM'd that a bit and played as that, but there's certain style parts about it that didn't fit well with what we wanted to do.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, because I've always heard what it was like. Starfinder is like what like Pathfinder 1.5 or 2.5 or something like that. I've always heard like it's a different direction than either edition of Pathfinder so far, which I found very, very interesting. But that is nice that you are able to adjust Pathfinder in the way to accommodate for other stories. And it seems like as well there is a lot of Pathfinder like supplements out there, even produced by the main company Pazio. How easy and how good are these supplements that you found if you've actually used them?
Like, do you mean supplements as in like adventure paths or like the side books that they put out?
Side books, yeah. So
Oh,
things that are adding. I know there's like, I think it might be. I don't remember for what edition it is, but there's like a Gears and Guns, like
yes,
supplement.
totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely love the Galarian lore and the world that they've made. I think it's really fun. It's in depth. All the little splat books, even if I don't use them for my game, I still kind of love buying them and reading them.
Of course.
Yeah, just I think what's it, the nerd term for my type of people are Vorthos. We just can't get enough lore. It's just our fan. I will watch videos of Elden Ring, but I will not play it.
It's just nice knowing the lore. It's fun. It's fun learning the story.
Exactly. I want to read every email in Fallout New Vegas. I need to know. But yeah, I think that I really enjoy the effort and time that Paizo puts into a lot of their books. And so even if they're not ones that I'm going to use, there's still a plethora of really fun ideas in them. And I can only imagine the Pathfinder 2nd Edition is also like that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, just from times where I've gone to a game store or a bookstore and just see all of the different Pathfinder supplements of many different editions, it's always such a joy to see it all. Do you have like favorite supplement books that you have for Pathfinder First Edition?
I really enjoyed the one. See here, I'm trying to think. There's one that goes specifically into their variant epic system they tried to make, called Mythic Adventures, that had a lot of fun ways to flavor basically superpowers.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's not for every game. It can get very very broken, but if done right, it's a lot of fun. And really, it's just any time that they go in depth into their world over like a splat book about a country. It's always really interesting to see how you apply Pathfinder rules and traits and how they make the flavor and the crunch fit together. Which is just my favorite thing in the whole world. Is if you can make flavor and crunch the same, then I'm sold. No matter what the game is, if the rules back up what the feeling is, then that's the coolest thing you can possibly do.
Absolutely. Honestly, I think that's a good kind of starting point. Pathfinder seems to be really, really, really good at combining flavor and crunch, and like flavor and mechanics and crunch and all of that together. Especially since I have done I will say I've already recorded the episode of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but I'm curious. So with D&D, I'll say as a starting point. There's classes, stuff like that. You get subclasses. How does the character creation in Pathfinder First Edition work to work in these ideas of flavor and mechanics together?
So with First Edition Pathfinder archetypes, they can come online almost at any point. In 5e, it seems everybody seems to generally hit third, unless you're a caster, then I believe it's second level.
There's some at like first. I don't know if there's any at second, but I know there's third.
Okay,
So
are they
either first or third?
Okay, yeah, I know there's a little bit of that disparity of like casters generally land earlier than marshals.
Yeah, it's always strange.
Yeah, which doesn't help that marshal caster divide argument, but versus Pathfinder. So Pathfinder 1e, let's say if you want to play a fighter, there's about 25 different variant archetypes you can work with.
Oh, wow.
Some of them will come online right away, where you get, focusing in like a single specific weapon. It opens up new feats you can take, new abilities, and tells you every power it trades out. And I think that might be the bigger thing is 5e's subclasses are meant to stack on top of your class. So they're baked into the class as a whole, versus Pathfinder 1e, you can just be a fighter, and fighter class is a very good class. But if you want to be a fighter, Eldritch Knight, then you can choose that as an archetype that starts swapping out some of your bonus feats or bonus abilities to get magic abilities and whatnot. And this applies to every class, so you can actually even combine archetypes, as it were, as long as they don't trade up the same things. So it makes for a very modular, very Lego kind of build for your characters of being able to make fighters that aren't fighters, alchemists that do sneak attack instead of bombs, and you can blend a really crazy character, which is, I think, a lot of the appeal of Pathfinder 1e as well, is that if you can think about it, we can make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like it's very, very open character creation, which I find to be insanely interesting. With Pathfinder First Edition, with the archetypes, are those the only is that the only kind of path? Because I know with Pathfinder Second Edition, you can essentially kind of customize your own build just through feats. Are the archetypes the only path within Pathfinder First Edition, or do you also have that option of just picking individual feats as you level up?
Oh, absolutely, yes. As I mentioned before, there's over 1,000 feats. You have all your feats to be able to make your character on top of all the archetypes as well. So you can.
Oh, that's great then.
Yeah, combined with there's opening traits which modify a little bit how things work. You have an overwhelming amount of options in First Edition, at least I'd say, to build whatever you want to do. I do enjoy, and I think Pathfinder 2e was a little bit better with that, of trying to blend a little bit of that into the feat system, because they give away so many more feats in Second Edition that feels like the right place to put all those parts together so people can Lego their favorite character.
Absolutely. No, that's super, super interesting. So that's kind of the whole thing with the classes and archetypes and so forth. Because I think Pathfinder uses ancestry instead of races, correct?
They do in Second Edition. In First Edition, they still called them races.
I see. How does that work? How do backgrounds work? What's each of the individual steps that you go through to make a character in Pathfinder, starting at the beginning?
Yeah. So let's see here. So Pathfinder 1e, if you're building a character, of course you start out either by your rolling your dice for your stats, or point by whatever your system's like. My process generally is I would look at then class to kind of see what you want to do, like what are you trying to build, before going over to ancestry or species or race or whatnot. Hopefully that way you can make both. You can swap those out, of course, for whichever one you do first, because it's all based on how much idea you already are coming to the table with. But early levels, if you haven't, you want to start looking at ancestry, you want to start looking at archetypes and kind of what you want to do with that character. I never recommend, of course, plotting out more than a few levels ahead, because the game's got to stay fluid, and you might find some cool stuff later that changes your whole build.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very easy to make a character quickly. It's very hard to finalize that character, I guess I'd say, because unless you have an idea of what you want, and hopefully you have somebody who's played before to kind of help guide you through feats and what things are kind of important or not important.
Yeah, no, that's the one thing with some of these crunchier systems is I think any system's always worth a try, worth trying out, seeing if you like it. Though when it comes to things such as Pathfinder, it can be pretty intimidating if you don't have someone already in your group that knows how to play the game. That's why online videos are great. Even actual play podcasts, such as Big Campaign Stories, you can get an idea of how the game works before you do play, but that can be very intimidating. Do you have any recommendations for people that are wanting to play Pathfinder First Edition but don't have anyone that they know to lead them through the game?
So, yeah, there's a couple things. So there is a podcast I found a while ago that is very newbie friendly to Pathfinder First Edition. is the Lawful Great Adventures podcast. They go through Pathfinder 1E up until they change systems, I think about 100 episodes in. But for those first episodes, they're very clear about how abilities work, combat works. They talk about the rules while they're playing. I found as an experienced player that it was a very nice listening. Like, it's a good story. It's a fun podcast, but they address the rules just the right amount that if you wanted to start playing, this would be a pretty good place to kind of get like, oh, okay, I think I understand how these classes should work. And then that should help with expanding outwards. I know there was a really fun podcast. I wish I could remember their name. I listened to them for quite a while before I got a new phone and lost them. But
No.
But they went through like all of the splat books. They went through all the archetypes, and they talked about kind of the benefits and of each of them. And they went through the races, and just they did basically a lot of in-depth kind of talking about the game from kind of a mechanical standpoint. Which if you're a crunchy boy, then that might be your jam.
Yeah.
if you're born to the
It seems like Pathfinder, who this game is for people who enjoy crunch. If you want rules light and narrative like focused, like, narrative first, mechanics later, all of that. If you want that, another game's gonna be for you. Pathfinder does not do that. Pathfinder is heavy crunch, heavy mechanics, all of that you have to fully commit to, which I think is really, really fun, but not everyone's cup of tea. I think it's still worth trying Pathfinder if you find it interesting, just to see if you'll learn anything from it. Even reading the book will be great. But yeah, it doesn't seem like that'll be everyone's cup of tea, but
No, absolutely not. And hopefully not too. There's so many cool games out there. I'd hate to see it just be like a homogenous thing, because eventually, like any game, if too many people play it, it gets boiled down to best options and those sort of things, which is a bummer when you have as much content as Pathfinder does, where you're kind of just supposed to have fun with it. Like, build that crazy build, and if it doesn't work, talk to your GM.
have fun.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're not having fun with it, then maybe don't play that game, right? The ancient rule: no D&D is better than bad D&D.
Exactly. It is always worth it to not play something that you hate and that you don't enjoy. Which is, I think that's a big reason why a lot of people are spanning away from. I mean, there are a lot of people who love D&D 5th edition. I've loved it and played it for a very long time. But when people start to learn about all of the different options out there, they realize that there are so many games that do what they want a lot better. So let's say, I know there's a lot of people who are super into min-maxing and super into the rules, sometimes called rule lawyers, which I think can be a good thing at times, can be a bad thing. Pathfinder is that fix or I shouldn't say that fix, is a great option for a play style such as that. It seems like Pathfinder First Edition, moreover Second, or would you say they're pretty equal within their rules?
Oh, I would say if you're a min-maxer type, and if min-maxers and rules lawyers are probably going to be attracted more to First Edition, because it does suffer a bit of the problem that 3.5 and earlier D&D problems had, and I think a little bit of 5e as well, is that the game's centered not too much around combat. Obviously, the system's built for combat, but there's just a lot of feats and a lot of options and a lot of character choices that lead towards combat. There's not as much of that built-in role-playing, I guess, that you can get from certain other systems. And so, if you're a Minimaxer, you're going to make the anime character who can cut the moon in half, we could probably find a way to make that happen. If you want to be the rules lawyer and make sure this combat is correctly performed, with each action being almost kind of like an accountant sheet of ballet moves, we can make that happen with every dice roll and every action being accounted for.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's great that there are heavier games like that for people who enjoy that, because I know there are. I mean, resource management can be fun. Reading all of the rules is really fun. like super tactful combat where you have built your character to be a very specific way can be very fun. Just not everyone's cup of tea. If you enjoy something more narrative, try something like I'm trying to think about something on my shelf. I mean, Dungeon World is an example of a more rules light fantasy game, kind of in the style of D&D high fantasy.
Mhm.
Inspired by that, but goes in a direction where the rules are a lot simpler. It's, at most you're rolling 2d6 plus 3. Like it's very, very simple. I know there's a bunch of other games out there. Dungeon World just is the one on my shelf. But if that's something more that you are akin to, something that's lighter and more narrative, then look for things that are a lot easier. Pathfinder probably won't fill that need for you, but Pathfinder's still fun.
Mhm.
So when you mentioned combat for Pathfinder, it does seem like a lot of these later or earlier editions of D&D, Pathfinder, so forth, are built around combat. That is kind of the thing that will draw you in, because it's like tactical combat, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, D&D originally started as what was it? As a combat simulator. I think it originally
Mhm.
came from like Chainmail, which was kind of a really old school, if you imagine your Warhammer 40K stuff,
Mhm. Mhm.
but fantasy, so Warhammer. Um, but eventually D&D became like, oh, what if we're just a squad of those people as opposed to a whole army?
Mhm.
And now eventually we're at the point where it's, we're a band of heroes. It gets a little smaller and each person gets a bit more powerful, so that way they can fulfill that fantasy want of being a combat monster or a mage or whatnot. Um, I think Pathfinder 1E is pretty good at what it does. It has some of the math problems that we've all realized, thankfully, over the last 20 years. That now that game theory has become a lot more common, it's really more interesting to see the analysis of kind of going back to those older games. Like, oh, hey, this doesn't really make sense in a math sense to have this in there, and leads to kind of a worse gameplay. You're probably better chopping that out. I think in comparison, what was it? So yeah, your Pathfinder 1E characters are going to be very good at combat, no matter kind of who they are or what they are. And especially if you choose your feats for it, combat's going to be where the game lands. But it does suffer a little bit from, I feel like 5e does as well, have a little bit of the pack of lone wolves problem of every character is their own badass or hero in their own right, but you have to work harder to make them synchronize.
Interesting.
Versus like Pathfinder 2e, which the game is built with the idea that each person's putting on a status effect or assisting so that you can really focus on making the team shine as a whole. So yeah, just different styles. I know a lot of people don't like D&D 4th edition, but 4th edition was also very good at very tactical combat, but also required working with your allies a lot in order to make things flow better.
Yeah, I've always, since I've started to play 5th edition, I always heard, fourth edition's so bad, blah, blah, blah. But it was more recently that it's like, actually, fourth edition had some really good ideas. Fourth edition had its own, things that made it appealing, and combat seemed to be one of those things. And that seems where, because Pathfinder came out as sort of a, like you said, a offshoot around the
Mhm.
fourth edition time, as to provide a different option because of the whole OGL thing and all of that. When it does come to combat within Pathfinder First Edition, how easy does it flow and how does it work?
Hmm. So yeah, so like it can be as easy as you want it to be to some extent.
Mhm.
I'd say Pathfinder First Edition for the first like 6 levels is going to play a lot like 5e. You have one attack, you have a move, an attack, and a bonus action.
Oh,
But
so it works off of that system, like the attack,
uh,
bonus action.
yeah, early levels, right, where you don't have a lot of options, it's pretty
Mhm.
much that. As you level up and as you get new powers, Pathfinder is a resource management, as you mentioned before. So you actually you have your swift action, your standard action, you have your move action. In this game, there's a lot more attack of opportunity options. So
Mhm.
get used to monsters getting the swing on you, or you finding ways to get around that, as opposed to
Oh, that's so
5e, which
interesting.
seems to be a lot more liberal with movement abilities, which I think is cool. Like it's combat's fun when people are jumping off tables and swinging on
Yeah.
chandeliers.
You want to move around. You don't want to stay
Yeah,
in one place the entire time.
yeah, like half the fun of watching a John Wick movie or um, oh shoot, what's his name? But yeah, like one of those movies is that they're interacting with the background, they're interacting with the set, and one of the punishing things of those earlier editions was if you do stuff you're not supposed to, there's an attack of opportunity, which means it until you get a feat to take that away, it does force your combat to be a lot more linear and a lot less
Mhm.
creative. As you, of course, level up, you get additional attacks. Unlike 5e, where those attacks are at the same bonus and they can be used during the same attack action, to use multiple attacks in the same round takes up your whole turn, so you can't move and do it. Um,
Oh, interesting.
so
I mean,
it
I guess that's
can.
also kind of fair because if you're gonna swing a sword like 3 times, you might not have the time to move in 6 seconds.
It's true, but that also means that it does that thing, right? It takes away mobility, so it,
Mhm.
it it feels a little kind of a bummer, right? When people say, "Oh, I'm a fighter," I walk up, I hit him with my sword. Pathfinder is horribly guilty of that, um,
Mhm.
especially when they've made doing a lot of maneuvers a really cool thing, but they take the spot of attacks, and since you kind of get the same points of putting a goblin to 0 as you do for grappling a goblin and throwing him into the chandelier. Um, you might as well go with the easy option, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
which is a bummer and is something for our home games we've definitely tried to push more the idea of do cool stuff is more cool. um,
Mhm.
so I think the combat can flow pretty smoothly, but as you level, it's going to get significantly more complex because you start introducing additional actions that kind of go with this. So your bonus action you can use on somebody else's turn is an immediate reaction, but that can burn your swift action for your next turn. You have different spells cast at different rates, and then eventually you can start combining these with move actions.
Mhm.
Not to mention you have class features that go on that occasionally use some of those, so it becomes once again resource management of do I want to walk 30 feet forward, do I want to give basically inspiration to a friend as my move action, do I want to set myself up against charge as this, but I'm going to use my standard
Mhm.
action for something else. It's all there and it all flows as you get used to it. But early level, it's pretty straightforward, pretty much like 5e. It's just as you get higher up, combat becomes very complex.
Yeah, it seems so. But it does keep those. I mean, it is more fun though. I mean, if you start getting a lot of abilities to actually then use them, it does make it more complex, but there are a lot of cool things that you can do, which I think evens it out a little bit because it's like as soon as you use it, it's going to be like, hell yeah, that choice was validated. I did it. That was super awesome. Like, woo, that was great. But it is good that it is simpler when you get started because especially when you're getting introduced into a new game, you don't want to just be thrown immediately into the nonsense and complicated combat and all of that, and then just absolutely shut down because you don't know what to do. So this actually, because I did the Pathfinder Second Edition episode, it was recommended for second edition to start out at first level. Do you recommend the same thing for Pathfinder first edition, even when you're starting like a big combat, or not big combat, big campaign, and you've played before? Do you still recommend starting at first level and then going from there?
um, you know, I personally would say yes, but that's because I'm a forever GM, and I absolutely love seeing all little baby characters walk around and do stuff, and watch them grow from level 1 up. Because it's very interesting to see. It's very interesting to see how players build when they don't get to skip levels. It's one thing to say start at level 5 and you already have feats and you already have things, and so your concept of what you want to do is already completed versus having to like live through the levels of getting there. Um,
And figure it out.
yeah, and kind of like, oh man, this feat's not that good or this power's not that good, but in 3 levels it'll be a lot better.
Mhm.
But if you have a competent crew and you have a group of people that can help each other and know the system, I usually say starting around like level 3 or 4 is usually fine. Gives them because Pathfinder is very lethal for how
Um,
complex the game is. More than a few heroes have been accidentally downed by a very early level crit.
Oh no.
Yeah. Because the game does not give away hit points as easily as the newer systems do, which I think that is a plus for the newer systems. Because losing a character is always a bummer, but Pathfinder, first edition at least, is still built a little bit on the old idea of suffering for some reason.
Suffering, and all characters are kind of disposable, especially because if you look at like when you look at people telling stories of when they used to play like D&D in their basement and stuff, it's like we didn't even have character sheets, we just like wrote new ones each time, stuff like that. We're going through Tomb of Annihilation, what is it, it's Tomb of Horrors, there we go. Yeah, it's like, super dangerous. You're probably not going to come out with the same characters you went in with, all of that. So it does. I mean, again, I think that kind of style of play has a special place. It has a place in gaming that people enjoy, but it definitely is a little outdated.
Absolutely, 100%. I think I'm very happy that all of us have, I guess, us tabletop role players as a community have had time to really look over games and kind of figure out, like, what do we want from them? Because, it's especially playing old second edition or things like that, where it's just like, oh, okay, these are meant to be brutal. But then you also do look at those back then, at least, there weren't a lot of character options, right? Like, when Elf was its own class, it's not hard. It's like, oh, my character died. Okay, there's a literal chart that says every single thing a 4th level rogue should have. There's no feats to choose from. There's not really other things like that to worry about. So I guess, your character can die and you can have a new one pretty quick. Versus, I'd say, nowadays with how game design has brought in feats and skill points and traits and all these really cool things to allow you to customize, it does mean that the age of falling rocks blow up your character, you can't just whip out another character in 20 minutes. Maybe you can, but I feel like most people want to spend a little time like figuring out what they want to play that hopefully won't repeat the whatever happened last time.
Exactly. And you get more attached to your characters as well, because you do put in a lot more effort into the actual character creation. I mean, I couldn't imagine playing a game of Pathfinder and not getting attached to my character, because you are slowly growing with them. You're figuring out the different feats. You're building the build that you want and narrowing in on that specific idea. And then to just have it just to have your character die would be heartbreaking. So it is a very, very interesting direction that I personally really enjoy, especially someone who enjoys heavy like role-playing games that are focused on the characters, stuff like that. Some of my favorites. But again, there's still a place for something like older editions of D&D, because I know that people still play those to this day. Pathfinder first edition, it might be more lethal, but the great thing is you can adjust it as the GM so that the characters don't die as easily, which is always a great thing. I'm curious, what are some of the homebrew like things that you have brought into your own personal campaigns of Pathfinder?
Yeah, so we all like to use the elephant in the room or world is square variation, where a lot of the basic level feats, baseline feats, are considered given for free to all the characters. So that way you can kind of get rid of a lot of what is referred to as feat taxes.
Feat taxes.
Yeah, because it feels a bummer when you look at your character and you're like, okay, if I get a feat every other level, we're playing 20 levels, so I get 10 feats. And in order to become an effective archer, I have to take, 3 of these feats right away. And it's like, cool, I'm permanently going to lose 3 out of my 10 immediately every time you want to play an archer. And that's kind of a bummer, because especially in a game with over 1,000 feats, there's so many cool ones you want to get to, and your build might not be able to. And so it kind of feels kind of feels a bummer to trap a lot of that creativity with a lot of really basic stuff. So that's one of our preferred home rules. I've made a few variations of things. Like I liked from, what was it, in D&D 3.5, they released a book called Unearthed Arcana that had just a whole bunch of variant class features, variant ancestries, variant feats, styles. Like it was just a whole splat book of make up your own stuff, right? It was absolutely brain food for a GM to just sit there and look through and just, oh my goodness, look at all these Oreos I can eat. All these things I've never seen before, and I want to do them all. But one of my favorite homebrew rules they offered in there was the armor bonus to convert damage to a lethal versus non-lethal state. So if, let's say, you're wearing full plate, and that gives you a +8 to your armor class, if you're hit for 10 damage, 8 of that would be non-lethal, and 2 would be lethal. Non-lethal damage heals faster than lethal damage does, and healing magic affects both of them at the same rate, so you get a better return on healing spells.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I just really like the idea of kind of changing that feel, right? Because we've all played the game where the monk and the paladin have the same armor class. One's decked out with a shield and a helmet and full plate, and he's on his horse, and the monk's got his sweet toga on and a beer in the other hand, and you're like, these people are the same difficulty to hit.
It brings more weight to actually having armor. That's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and it's my players really enjoy it because I don't know why. I mean, I love my players. Most of them I've been friends with now for a very long time, but all my players just absolutely hate playing clerics. And so there's never any healing, which means that, like, for Pathfinder universe, that means, if you had 30 hit points and you had 30 hit points and you're level 3 and you took 25 of that, if you don't have a healer, it's going to take you about 8 days to get all the way back up to full.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's a lot grittier healing as well.
Exactly. Versus that was before, when I introduced the non-lethal rule, that helped mitigate that because you restore your character level per hour versus non-lethal, as opposed to character level per day of hit points. So, the paladin could take that 25 hit points and let's say 20 of that's non-lethal, then cool, in about 6 hours, they've basically got their hit points back to some extent, but they still have that 5 dragging down the top. So, yeah, that I thought was a really fun one.
Yeah, that's super cool. I like that a lot, especially if you're looking to make it a little less gritty, a little less dangerous.
Yeah, and so let's see here. What else? As far as other than that, I mean, since we have a very homebrew world, we have our own, races. We have our own backgrounds. I personally like to I write up like location bonuses for a lot of places. So as part of character creation, players will choose like a location they're from that they kind of grew up at. That I include a few, like a small package of custom traits that kind of work with that location.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's the fun part of having such a crunchy system. Does mean it's pretty easy to get underneath the hood and modify things to make the game feel more how you want it to feel.
Absolutely. I think that is insanely cool. And actually, with you mentioning you play in a homebrew world, I am curious, what do you think of the base world and setting for Pathfinder First Edition?
I think Galarian is wonderful. There's a little bit of everything between, I think, the technology wastes, where you do have some kind of sci-fi elements inside of this, like you have the city, which is kind of run by lawful evil characters, but because it is lawful evil, it's not horrific evil to its full extent, so much as it's a very functioning and kind of cruel bureaucracy. There's just so much, especially with the splat books, there's so much detail and kind of fun put into the world that I feel the Pathfinder base world works wonderfully for a lot of what people want, or there's at least a lot of inspiration that I recommend any GM for any system just read through, especially considering most of their information is online for free. You can definitely just go crazy on.
Oh, we love that.
Yeah, like either Archives of Nethys or I think the D20 PFSRD will both have a lot of that information. And so, yeah, like the base setting is wonderful. And if I hadn't had started with my friends doing all this stuff forever ago, I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the basic setting I use.
Hmm. So did the world that you're playing in now, did that come, because didn't you mention playing in D&D 3
Hmm.
3rd edition? Has that world come all the way from D&D 3rd edition?
Yeah. That we started with D&D 3.0, and I played a very generic fantasy game, very much like we joked about, kill the rats to fight the god. Um, Luckily, I think back then the Epic book came out, so all the rules for going over level 20 were finally published. So I think that game went to everyone got to level 33.
Oh
Um,
my god.
yeah, which was crazy. It was absolutely nuts and so much fun. But once we ended that game, my players wanted to keep going, and me being a huge Dune nerd, I was like, okay, well, let's start evolving the world each time. So
Mhm.
we did 3.0 until 3.5 came out. Then we adjusted 3.5 rules, and then once Pathfinder came out, we adjusted those rules. We tried looking at 4th edition, but it didn't have enough modification to it to kind of do what we wanted, especially with our homeworld kind of drifting away from really focusing on deities to having corporations and then starting to have guns, and now, like the podcast,
Wow.
it's sorcerers and cell phones, and players getting some pho from a push cart while one of them is casting divination spells.
As one does.
Yeah.
No, that's really, really cool though that this world has lasted and evolved so much over the years. That's amazing. Oh, I would love to play a long form game like that. I've only recently started to GM. It's only been like a little over a year since my first campaign has started that I was GMing. And
Oh,
so
awesome.
it's been really fun, and it's so cool to hear other people who have had these games and worlds and all of that have lasted over years and years and years and actually still being played in. That is so awesome. I love that so much. It's great that the base setting is as good as it is, and seems also quite diverse in the way that it's set up. That gives a lot of options that if you don't want something that's closer to a high fantasy, medieval fantasy type setting, there are other options just within the base world, which is awesome because it gives people more leeway to just start exploring different things.
Yeah, I'd say, especially with the splat books, it really lends itself well to exploration.
Mhm.
I also give, there's a lot of variety. I also give a lot of kudos to Paizo for a lot of inclusivity in their work. So you can have people of all lifestyles and everything,
Mhm.
that make those stories all the more fun. But then, yeah, with each of those splat books, you can have your party explore the world kind of with the GM as they move to a new place. And there is usually a book or something, little supplement that'll tell you about the next district, continent, whatever giant thing or whatever part you want to go to next. So you can
Mhm.
really make that a very fun learning process for everyone at the table of wandering the world and just seeing cool stuff.
That sounds so fun. Oh, it almost seems like it's just worth it enough to play Pathfinder just to start exploring some of these settings and worlds, just to see, what's there. And I've never been I love being like a note taker and piecing together like the world and stories and stuff as a player.
Mhm.
And as a GM, I really enjoy creating a world with, lore and stuff. I've never been super heavy into it, but that sounds really, really fun to just like go full throttle into everything that the Pathfinder world has to offer. Oh, that
I,
sounds awesome.
I will also give Paizo this. They did a great job of leaving a lot of their stuff open ended.
Hmm.
Because that is something I'd say, like, as many nerds, I enjoyed like my Forgotten Realms for quite a while.
Hmm.
I enjoyed my Greyhawk stuff and my Dragonlance and these things, but all of those settings and all of those worlds, unfortunately, it felt like the big stories had been told.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's like, oh, okay, if I go to the Forgotten Realms, I know what's in Waterdeep, or I know what's this, and there's Mordenkainen, or sorry, what's the Elminsters? I think the Forgotten Realm giant wizard guy, and all those things are very cool, and they're all long lore, but they also kind of feel like they're done.
Set in
Um,
stone.
Yeah. There's you're coming to a world with a lot of history that instead of you adding to that history, you're kind of living in the shadow of it.
Mm.
Which, hey, depending on the game you want to run, that can work great. I can definitely, especially after having run a homebrew game for a very long time, I try to make sure everything, because I do have new players jump in and join us, and because it's always great to get new people. But at the same time, I do understand there's there's a lot of homebrew lore here that can feel very daunting. So I do try to make sure that, at least for my own stuff, that I don't make too many references to things, or what is it? It's fine to have Easter eggs for the players who've been playing for a long time, but it's not fair to have a world that requires you to have taken notes to get to the part of being able to play, I guess.
Yeah, I can understand that because I've played a fair share of some D&D where it was like I don't know what's going on just because I haven't read the lore to it.
Yeah. There's like a meta knowledge there, which if you have to have that meta knowledge to enjoy it, then it's that doesn't appeal to me. That's where I really give kudos to Paizo is, they've left a lot of their things open so that players can kind of do whatever they want with their stories. Starfinder does a great job of this, of Starfinder in that setting. Galarian, the continent of Pathfinder 1E, or the planet of Pathfinder 1E, is just gone. Nobody knows what happened to it. We just know that now we have access to the ability to make spaceships and move around. And that's, they don't tell you why, they don't tell how. There's like 3 gods that might be involved with it. But it's just like, cool, man, have fun, tell your own stories. Maybe your game, they find out what happened. Yeah, maybe in your game, they find out what happened to the planet. Maybe they don't, or maybe nobody worries about it.
I like that a lot. It gives it more of that sandbox feeling, but with enough structure there that you even like if you do like the lore and stuff, you can go into that, but still have it be open. Oh, that's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and exactly. Yeah, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, as opposed to showing up at the party at the end of the night. You're there to kind of be part of what makes that a fun story. And that's not to poop on D&D, blah blah blah. I think there's lots of fun stories being told in those, but it just gets what is it? There's too many heroes, I guess.
Yeah.
Too many Drizzits and Artemises and Jarlaxles and Racelands and blah 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 that have all affected the world to a point that, oh, if you didn't read this book by R.A. Salvatore, then do you even know why there's a statue next to the fountain? You're like, man, I don't care. That's crazy.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so funny. I mean, I personally played through the Waterdeep Dragon Heist. And even though that was a very fun experience, I did enjoy it. There were a lot of references and stuff made throughout that entire game that I'm like, okay, I'm going to write it down because the way that you are saying this seems important. I do not know what this connects to, but we are just going to continue on. But yeah, no, I definitely agree. I agree on not wanting to put down D&D to raise other games up. What I don't mind happening is D&D being used as a reference and touchstone because that's what most people are familiar with. Most people have probably played, and if not played, heard of D&D at least. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So especially when it comes to something like Pathfinder, where D&D is a very direct relation, I think it's completely fair to compare the two and like the advantages and disadvantages of both systems because there are definitely, there are advantages to D&D. I've had a lot of games, most of my TTRPG like career, quote unquote, has been played through in D&D because that was the game I started out with. That was the game I had a lot of fun in. It's only been more recently that I've been trying other games. So there's nothing wrong with playing D&D. If you still enjoy playing D&D, play it, have fun, have a good time. If that game works for you and your group, have a fun time with it. This is just if you're listening to this, you're probably curious what Pathfinder First Edition is. And it's not to bring D&D down or anything. It's just it does different things. And to have a more open sandbox type setting that you don't have to kind of compete with other heroes that are already written into the lore, that's pretty cool. But yeah, so what I'm curious about next is how good are the player resources for Pathfinder? Is there easy access to them like on their own website? Are there websites with good resources? What's the support for the players?
Oh,
Like,
100%. Yeah, for players, especially, I mean, I mentioned a little bit before, but yeah, the Archives of Nethys website, I think it was about 2 years ago, officially got approval from Paizo to host basically everything.
oh,
All
that's
your
awesome.
all your first edition, all your second edition, all your Starfinder,
Oh
all of it,
man.
all of it is for free on that website for everybody to enjoy. So it's very easy to, if you want to go try Pathfinder, hey, yeah, you don't have to buy anything. Just you already have the dice, go for it. And if you like it, I recommend buying stuff because it supports them.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, that's for player resources. It's wonderful. Reddit has some pretty good communities for like Pathfinder 1E resources that
Mhm,
people have built to help guide through like feat trees and feat things and how to combine archetypes and stuff like that.
mhm,
So between community and officially licensed stuff, I feel like being a player in a Pathfinder game is pretty easy um,
mhm.
to get as much information or more as you'd want.
Now, how about GM resources?
Pathfinder 1E, I believe, still suffered a little bit from the kind of old style thinking of 3.0 and 3.5 and of, yeah, you're a GM, you're the boss now, be a boss. And it's like, oh, but I'm not here to boss around my friends. I want to tell fun stories and roll dice, play make believe. Um, and so I think at first there was not a lot of good resource for it. I know in later Splat books they definitely always had a section for the GMs to, hey, here's how you can incorporate new stuff, or here's how some ideas would help. So I think they eventually learned from that. And I know in the Pathfinder 2 book, their main GM book is a wonderful resource
Mhm.
filled with stuff. And I always throw this out if you can find a PDF, or you can probably find a used bookstore. The 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is absolutely wonderful.
I've
Um,
heard.
yeah, just pure brilliant advice, great ideas. It's killer. It's the good stuff that we should be focusing on moving forward with like all this all the game theory and all the things we're creating.
Mhm,
Yeah, though I'd say on the overall end, less handy for a GM. It's definitely better now.
mhm. That's good. Yeah, and that's always, I think, the tricky thing, like you said, when it does come to some of these older games, is it's like, do whatever. You're the boss. Have fun. Which is like, yeah, cool, awesome, great, but a little bit of support, because that's at least for me where I find with D&D on rulings,
Hmm.
it tends to be very slack for DM resources on like how to interpret rules and things like that. That it's most what people kind of come up with on Reddit, their own solutions to things and stuff like that, versus actually giving you the support within the rules. But that is good that it's starting to lean in the way of more support, people actually working together, even the company like producing books that are more supportive, which
Hmm.
is Pazio still producing books for first edition?
They are not. They've finished that. We will never get a new book,
No.
supposedly, which I'm a little sad because they did already announce that they're doing a gold edition, or basically a rewrite of Pathfinder 2E with a
Mhm,
lot of their stuff cleaned up and a lot of it brought into one place so you can get access to that and whatnot, which since you already have everything on the website, you don't have to buy it.
mhm,
But it's really cool for them to do that. And that is something that I would 100% I would 100% support if they
mhm,
went back and redid first edition a little bit like that of,
mhm,
hey, there's some feats that don't really go anywhere, or the way they're worded don't really work right. There's some archetypes which don't flow very well, or were clearly written by certain editors or were edited by people who maybe didn't realize what the intent or the how it works with the rules. And so I would absolutely,
mhm.
it'd be amazing if we get a cleaned
Rewrite
up
of
version.
Pathfinder first edition.
Yeah, I mean, it is a massive albatross of so much rules, and it's insane. But heck, why not? If they get bored, that's my recommendation.
Yeah, it would be awesome. No, that would seriously be great. I mean, I think it's always a great time at any point when a game gets revisited and they can just kind of update on stuff. Because actually, personally, I play Monster of the Week, and they decided to re-release the main book,
Oh.
bringing actually one of the bringing in a lot of the information from one of the supplement books into it. I think just updating things and all of that, and it's like, I already have both of those books, but I still want the new one because I want to see what they change. Because it's always exciting when a game it gets a fresh coat of paint, essentially. Like, it's just updated. It feels good. It feels nice and new. And I mean, that's kind of even where additions come into play. That's almost, I mean, additions are usually a much larger change, changing rules and mechanics and stuff more. But that is kind of what they are, is an update of the game that you've already been playing, just in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Which I definitely find very, very interesting. So with Pathfinder, there are so many mechanics in this game and all of that. What are the important bits?
I guess, yeah, the important bits are going to be pretty similar to 5e or to actually any kind of D20 system, is understanding your action economy, so that you feel like you're kind of getting the most out of your turns or what you want to do. And then really it's just understanding, I guess, how your character plays. Every class definitely feels a little different, especially with spells and how many feats can kind of work together. And sometimes there's unseen combos that people run into that make for really cool things. But, you find out that something didn't work or works the way you wanted to, and maybe it works better now. So it's tough. I'd say probably the biggest thing is understanding your action economy so you can get the most out of your turns and hopefully be able to do the stuff that you really want to do. And then I think the simple part is just, I guess, listen. Yeah, I guess that's it. I guess the action economy is probably the biggest for that. I'm trying to think if there's something else I feel like there's something else on the back of my brain that is like, understanding your character, or really just making sure you're playing with other people, right? Like, you don't have to do everything.
Yeah, it's not all on you.
Yeah, because especially with Pathfinder, there's, with all the archetypes and things, you can make almost any class do anything. So you don't have to try to make a monster that doesn't need a party. You can very easily make a character that's really meant to flow with everyone else. So I think knowing your action economy is really going to help that, and just knowing how your own play style, I guess. Yeah, I guess that'd probably be the biggest thing, tying back in with those min-maxers and rules lawyers and people who are there just to have fun.
Yeah.
That's really going to factor into how well you enjoy Pathfinder. Because I feel like anybody can sit at the table, but if crunchy rules aren't your thing and you just want to play with friends, you could definitely do that. But make sure you understand what your character can do, so you don't slow it down for anybody else or ruin any fun.
Absolutely. I think that is great advice. Just and communicate as a table. Make sure everyone's on the same page. Check in every so often, especially with new players, just to make sure that they are enjoying and they know they're enjoying the game and they know what's happening. Because it can be very easy to get lost starting a new game like that, which actually makes me curious. Have you introduced any new players to Pathfinder First Edition?
Yeah, actually. What is it? I did a small game with a group of people late last year, that during the whole OGL thing, I had some people ask about it in Discord chats, and so I ran like a small adventure for them.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. In my own home game, I'm definitely always down to bring new people in and have them come along. I think right now I have like 15 players.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, split into 3 groups, not all at once, but Definitely I've had a few of them. I've definitely had players come in that have never played before, teach them how to play and kind of, make sure they know, hey, we use a lot of homebrew stuff, but hopefully it all makes sense. So that way when they go out to other tables, they can be like, oh, okay, this is what's different.
Yeah, I know this isn't exactly what it's like. Absolutely. That's really cool. How easy do you find it to, I mean, since you are more experienced as a GM within Pathfinder, how easy do you find it to introduce those new players?
I would say so. All right, let me see if I can make sure I put all these words in the right order. I feel like it's becoming easier as more of this kind of tabletop culture becomes common, right? Thank goodness for, your Settlers of Catan and all of these kind of benchmark table games that people have all played. So they all kind of get the idea of sitting around with this, like we have a whiteboard we draw on. So there's that idea is already kind of there of kind of what to expect a little bit. And then from there, kind of guiding people in how to build characters. Now, I definitely, there's a strange divide, not a divide, it's not bad or anything, but there's a very big difference, I think, between people who come to tabletop games from being a reader versus being a video game player. Like there's a very different mentality at work there, which neither is good or bad. It's just if we're sitting down at a table and we're going to play a role-playing game, all right, hey, you don't get health back from eating the goblin.
You can't just eat a snack.
Yeah, like, and for the person who came from books, it's like that's a wonderful 6-page backstory, but you are level 1, so maybe you haven't overthrown your father as the king of the empire yet, kind of thing. And so, yeah, I feel like it's not hard to get new people in. There's a lot of rules there, and so it's very important, I think, to as a GM, kind of put the bumpers up on the bowling lane to keep, at least for the first few characters, keep it pretty straightforward and pretty easy for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite new players I introduced the game probably about 5 or 6 years ago, who still plays with us. When he first started playing, he's like, "Oh, I want to play a bard as my first character, and I have all these spells and this." I was like, "Hey, man, why don't we play like just a small side campaign, you and me as you as a fighter?" And
Easy.
yeah, and mostly that was so I could kind of teach him the action economy and kind of how attacks work and what all of your options can be. And by the end of the 3-4 sessions we played of that, he went back and kind of revised his character and said, "Okay, bard's maybe not for me yet. If it's possible, I want to play a fighter, but maybe I'll play a barbarian." It's like, perfect, great. You can definitely play that bard, but it's ease yourself into the system, because if you're going to cast spells, you're going to need to know what those are. You're going to need to read up on them. You need to know that all their modifiers change every level. There's just a lot of background info. It's almost like a whole new sub game if you decided to be a caster. But it was easy enough to teach rules by helping them make simple characters at first.
So when it does come to introducing new players, I mean, those are the basics of like introducing them in, like as long as they understand the rules and all of that, ease them in, play the right thing, easiest type of thing first. Is there a common hurdle that comes up for players specifically that maybe either haven't played before or played another game before it that they then have with Pathfinder?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is across the board for a lot of other games. It's decision paralysis. If you've never played a open table, or if you've never played like a tabletop RPG with a bunch of people who just all are sitting there smiling and look at you with their dice and snacks and whatnot, they're like, "What do you want to do?" And that person's like, "I guess I'll go to the bar and order a beer." It's like, "All right, cool, you got a beer, man. What do you want to do now?" And you just watch as they're like, "Oh God, I guess I asked them if there's quests." It's like, "All right, yeah, we'll get there." But there's just, I think there's a barrier there of people don't want to do the wrong thing, because especially when you're showing up to anybody's hobby, right? If you're sit down to play Magic cards with everybody for the first time, and you go to play a spell, and someone's like, "Oh, that's not how that card works," you feel bad, right? You don't want to interact because you're like, "Oh, I messed up this clear
Yeah.
social dynamic. And I feel like that, especially in this, but it's really important to kind of get across like, hey man, we're all playing make believe.
Yeah. We're just chilling.
Yeah, like we're all just going to tell a dumb story together. We're going to have a blast. We're all pretending to be other people. It's, try not to let too much weight get on you for it. But that's the biggest hurdle I've seen is that, there's unbound imagination just has so many different ways that can go. And you don't want to, and people's natural fear of messing up means they end up, at least in the beginning, if you don't kind of make sure to put the spotlight on new players and make sure to talk to them, I have found most of them are very comfortable just sliding quietly into the back seat and not doing anything. And it's, you got to get them out there you got to roll a few ones to really see what the fun part of the game is, I feel.
Exactly. You got to mess around. I mean, it is like, it's kind of like when you start to become like an adult, you have to start making bad decisions to see like, I mean, I shouldn't say an adult, but like when you're a teenager and stuff, you start making bad decisions so that you can learn from life and all of that and know, what's fun, what the direction is, all of that. Like you kind of need that era of doing stupid things.
Oh, 100%. It's, what is it? I still think of like stupid story time. I still remember like when I very first moved out and I was like, oh man, I really want a lemon meringue pie. And I was like, oh wait, I live by myself now. I could just go get one.
Yeah.
And so I just went and got like a lemon meringue pie and a 2-liter of Mountain Dew. And I think started playing Diablo 2 and ate like half of this pie. And then immediately, like 3 hours later, I'm just stomach hurts. And I'm just like, oh God, why did someone stop me from eating so much pie?
You have to find out through trial and error.
Exactly. You gotta, and lesson learned, right? Like, okay, cool. This is why moderation exists.
Yeah, exactly. But it really is the thing. You have those, like, essentially, especially as a child, like, you just want to, like, do everything. Like, you want to eat all the candy, all of that, and everyone tells you no. And then as soon as you do have the freedom, it's like, I can't just do that. It is so interesting it is so interesting how that really does help is just experience.
Yeah, and that translates to D&D and to any of these tabletop ones, right? When you sit there and you're asked to make believe, you can do anything you want, and you have the players who sometimes take to it. And they're like, "Well, I'm gonna stab the bar owner and throw a rock through a window," and okay, well the guards are gonna come and get you. I'm gonna fight the guards, and then the guards beat him up and take him to jail. And that player's like, "Oh, that was terrible." I'm like, "Well, that's the repercussions of your actions," and they're like, "Okay, I won't make such a murder hobo next time."
Yeah, can't just be an absolute menace.
Yeah.
Immediately. Do you have like a favorite first time player story?
Oh geez, let's see here. First time. Well, so yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the first time we all played D&D for the first time. My group of friends. We obviously didn't read the rules that well.
Of course.
We all came in with our own ideas, and so like we had the paladin. We had the character who played the paladin who had 8 charisma. Because they didn't really read that charisma is what all of their stuff works off of. So they didn't get any bonus from any of their charisma for anything. They could barely smite. We didn't read that wizards started with spell component bags. So me playing a wizard, I was constantly asking the DM what parts I could scrape off of like this cavern or off this monster, and then hope that it lined up with the description in the spell of, oh, you need bat guano. It's like, oh God, how much bat guano do I get before we have to go back?
That's so good. Well, that's a fun way. Like, even though it was like the wrong thing, like that was the wrong way to play. That's such a fun way to play, though, where you're just slowly gathering components.
Oh, it was so much fun because I think we ended up fighting a ghoul, and I was so excited because there's a spell I wanted, which is Ghoul Touch, and he says you can't cast that unless you have a piece of clothing torn from a ghoul. And I was like, oh my God, guys, don't burn it, murder that monster, but I need all of its clothes.
It's my time to shine.
Yeah, it's like once we steal all this ghoul's clothes, then I can cast Ghoul's Touch on things that aren't ghouls because they're immune to it. But it was
so funny.
Yeah, it was just a lot of fun. All of us being bad at the game and not knowing how to play.
Hmm.
Made for, I think, let all of us kind of explore that fun area of the sandbox of kind of learning, of learning how to play the game badly. So when you come back and understand what you're doing, you're like, oh, okay, this makes so much more sense why these things are like this.
Yeah. This is how you play correctly. But then I think the fun thing with that is even though you played it quote unquote wrong. I mean it is wrong, but at the same time if you had fun and you enjoyed playing like that, you could then kind of take some of those elements from those games and insert them into later games where yeah, maybe you're following the rules more closely, but maybe you might have a rule where you might need to gather, like you might have your wizard gather more things. Maybe you'll make the components still, like the component pouch still useful, but maybe there's special spells or something that then they can gather things for that kind of give you that fetch quest idea. Like I think it's fun to play a game in the wrong way and then find a way to play the game that you really like and then put it in a later game and just have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, no, it was it. I feel that it really helped us all kind of start the idea of homebrewing because
Mhm.
we all played it wrong and we're like, oh man, this game's really tough. Here's how I would change these rules to make this better. And of course, once we read the rules, like, oh, a lot of these have been adjusted, but we also came up with several ideas that we really enjoyed that we now use to just kind of flow into the game because that's how we tried to fix the bad game we were playing originally.
That's so good. I like that a lot. And it's it's so wild to me to like play for the first time like that because my first time that I played D&D was 5th edition at like a game store and
Hmm.
most of the people like knew what they were doing and stuff like that and I had no idea and I just remember the monster is like on the tip of my tongue. I know like what it is but I cannot think of like the name of it. It was like this one shot thing where we were trying to figure out what was causing issues in the town and we go on this little adventure and we figure it out and then we like fight this large creature at the end and I remember getting like the finishing blow and and like the DM like, telling me to describe like what I do and stuff like that and I'm just playing with this pre-generated character. I don't know what half of the things on the sheet mean, all of that, but I describe like how I bring this monster down, like even like that, like specifically like smoky breath comes out and all of that. Like I had the best time and I remember after that session because before that I was like I don't know if I want to play this game and my brother was playing. It's like okay, you should finally just come play one game, see how you like it. After that game I could not stop talking about what happened because it was so cool and I just needed to play more and since then I played every week after that. We ended up doing a full campaign but those first time moments where you get to play a role playing game for the first time and just do something really cool is so memorable.
100%. It's yeah, it's a really wonderful feeling. I agree.
It is. And I mean, like, I think that's for me at least, if I haven't played with too many new players, but if I were, that would be my biggest goal is to make it, to give them enough opportunity and to make it so that they have enough fun and uh, the game is loose enough that they can have a lot of fun and creativity and make those memorable moments for themselves because that's what keeps people coming back because it's just so fun.
Yeah, and and it's funny you can the want to provide that memory or that experience. I think is a lot of what make GMs makes GM specials for whatever table they're at.
Mhm.
It also becomes really obvious when a GM is a player. Where if you've seen a table where the GM finally gets to play, they almost always are a support class. It feels like because they're always there to be like, okay, well, time to lift up these other people because I want them to do cool stuff because that's just part of the being the storyteller.
Yeah. Because you just want everyone to have fun. Like, it's not just thinking about your own experience, it's thinking about everyone's at the table, which can be a very, very daunting role. But I think personally, it's the most fun that I've had at a table with actually running games. I've played
Mhm.
plenty, but the most fun has been running games. No, but that definitely is a very, very special role. And I think forever GMs, even though can sometimes be seen as a negative thing, I feel like more specifically in the D&D community, because it's like, oh, I just want to play. I think the people that really, really enjoy it love it. Like they, even though it's like, oh yeah, I'm a forever GM, like kind of that's the joke. They really don't mind. It's
Yeah.
their favorite thing.
Yeah, I mean it's odd. I think it becomes an insult or a problem in the D&D specifically community because of what I feel is the lack of support a lot of the D&D books give to GMs.
Hmm.
Um, it's the pressure. So the problem being there is with them without them having solid rules to be able to fall back on to limit actions to control the table. I don't want to use control because I don't want it to feel bad, but I guess to be able to guide how the session's supposed to go,
Hmm.
having that crunch behind you really gives you the support to make sure your rules of cool are staying in line with kind of the game
Hmm.
and not just kind of letting players do whatever, which there's a time and place for that and it's not bad.
Hmm.
But I would say that, yeah, there's a lot of these other books, or the more narrative focused ones, being a GM almost makes you a player at the
Hmm.
table. So it's not so much that you're outside of the group, you're part of it. You're what, a mutually agreed upon referee.
Yeah.
Um,
You're the one, I mean, guide even. Like, you're the one guiding through the story. There's a lot of really good kind of terms that I feel like doesn't cause that separation. I think that's
mhm.
also a problem with the D&D is there with D&D specifically, and I mean maybe it's within other games as well, but D&D I feel the strongest where there's that separation of the DM and the players.
I mean, part of that, I wonder if it just comes from the history of D&D itself. Like, I listened to my uncle tell me about D&D stories when he was a kid, and I'll be honest, I'm like, wow, I would never play at your table. That sounds awful. And I'm sure he hears stories about my table, and it's like, well, I don't understand. Why aren't you killing these people? Um,
Hmm.
and I wonder if that's part of it is the old second edition and first edition style of you kind of were a dungeon master is what it kind of seemed like from when I
Hmm.
hear stories from older people telling me their old D&D stories was that like you would make a dungeon during high school or after class, but your friend would also make one. So you would all be playing together and you would go into dungeons that were made by your other players when they got their GM time.
Hmm.
And so I wonder if part of that comes from the fact that at that point there was that separation, right? Like this is the person hosting the dungeon, so they're in charge of it, and they're playing against you, kind of thing.
Hmm.
But that's not really how the game has evolved, uh,
Yeah.
and so getting away from dungeon master to more game master, or storyteller, or narrator is more important to make sure that we all understand like we're all here having fun as players. Like I'm a forever GM, but I'm playing all the time. Like I get to roll dice
Exactly.
so much. I love it. And yeah, like I just wonder if it's an antiquated idea that hasn't gone away just because of the way table not trauma, but table cycles go, right? Like
Hmm.
your GM was taught by their GM was taught by their GM. So the person who's now playing fifth edition really wants to include a monster that has a Vorpal guillotine on its back so it can chop people's heads off. And everyone's like, wow, where did you come up with that? Why would we even want that? Because they heard a story from 3 GMs ago that
Hmm.
there's a monster that does that. And they tell the story with a lot of fun about, oh, yeah, and then it killed 3 of my players. We all had a great laugh. Um, versus, bringing that out now is like, oh, hey, that's not really a cool monster if it just grapples you and chops our heads off,
Hmm.
um, kind of thing. So I wonder if a lot of that is just passed down tradition or rituals, I guess.
Yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense because I mean, it is the history of the game. It is what you see even depicted in media and stuff like that. You know, the dungeon master controls all. So I would agree. I think it's definitely more tradition than it is. It's more tradition that then people take as the normal.
Yeah.
And I find that very interesting, but I am glad that it's going away from that idea because I mean there's been plenty of books that I'm flipping through, and as they're introducing the game, it's like, all right, you know, this is meant for 3 to 4 players, whatever, and you will all be playing this game, but one person will be taking on a slightly different role, but they are still a player, and it's like, look at like that is the best way to describe it. It's just a different role. They're still playing. They're still their fun still matters. Everyone, you know, what they say also doesn't mean more than what you say. Because I feel like, I mean, that's kind of the whole thing with in D&D, especially. I think ends up putting a little bit of tension when there's a lot of rules that are up for debate, and as a DM, you have to rule them the way that you would rule them, and not everyone usually agrees on that.
Mhm.
Uh, which I think that can end up causing some tension. But I like the games that are like, you know, ask the group, how do you, you know, how would you rule this? And that's the more of the approach that I've taken with D&D as well. If there's a rule that comes up in question, it's like, all right, if I don't have the time to look it up immediately now and I don't already know it, let's make a ruling right now at the table of just how it's going to be. Because it's quicker that way. I don't want it to just be I'm ruling this way, and then like the whole player's idea gets, you know, completely destroyed and all of that. Like they can't do it anymore. I'm more willing to collaboratively work with my players to figure out the best solution that works in that moment, and then continue on, and we can look at the rule later and figure out what, you know, what it actually is. And I'm
Mhm.
curious with Pathfinder, because it is so rule heavy, in those types of situations, do you go to look for the rules, or do you just make a judgment call in that moment and continue on to then see what it is later?
A lot of times we'll make the ruling
Mhm.
and just check it up later. But this is actually one of those great moments, like you mentioned before, of this is why it's great to have a rules lawyer at the table. Um, though I feel pretty confident in my knowledge of rules, I definitely have a player who loves rules.
Mhm.
Um, and so they go through and they read them and they look it up and they understand these things. And so they often are pretty quick and ready when someone says, like, hey, I'm going to move forward and do a disarm check, that they will pull up the disarm rules before we even get to the roll. So that way they're ready for it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so I, I feel that most of the time it's usually we've been playing long enough that we're pretty safe just making up a call, ruling in the moment that we know is going to be pretty close. But we're always more than happy to go back and re-look at things if we read something wrong, or go back and understand kind of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that I definitely prefer. I'm more of rule of cool. Even with a crunchier system, I think I would still do the same. Where it's like in this moment, if it's cool, let's all have fun. Like you were saying earlier, where it can be a little bit more punishing with like the opportunity attacks and the movement and stuff like that. Maybe you don't have to completely break the rules to make it fun, but ruling it to be a bit more, you know, rule of cool. That sounds fun. Let's go for it. I think is I shouldn't say better in the long run because there is no better, because if people enjoy the rules then they wouldn't enjoy it that way, but at least for my table and the play style that I enjoy, I would rule things as cool more often than not, than to actually like look for the rules. But that's just for different play styles. Go
Yeah,
in different directions.
yeah. No, I mean I think rule of cool. I think rule of cool is very important and needs to exist to help. I think a lot of new GMs,
Mhm.
because that is the thing, right? Like that's where I feel like 5e and Pathfinder 1e to some extent. There's just not a lot of support on the GM side for things, and so letting the DM have in their back pocket a little like, hey, here's a rule of cool. If you think something's neat enough, you don't have to quite explain it as much. You can just kind of let it happen, or you can
Mhm.
do that thing you want. And I think that's it. That's important. You can't overuse it, of course, blah, 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 standard disclaimers. But I think in the long run, it helps the whole table have more fun if the GM also isn't worried about having to have every rule encyclopedically ready to be used correctly at every time.
Exactly, because that would just also take a lot of time to flip through and be like, oh, trying to find it specifically. But no, absolutely, I definitely agree.
A lot of tabletop games are a lot like beer pong in that everybody has these house rules, but we all know the basic part of the game.
Yeah.
Where you get there and be like, oh, okay, do you guys have crit fails on skill checks? No, you don't. Okay. You have to and so yeah, it's kind of that. I think that the rule of cool and having those rules slow down and stop the game ruins beer pong as much as it ruins D&D if it becomes too often, right? Like
Exactly. Actually, I'm curious because I heard that Pathfinder Second Edition has a slightly different system when it comes to critting and failing. Crit succeed and then crit failing. What is Pathfinder First Edition system? Does it work off of the same, like, nat 20, nat 1, or is it slightly different?
So it's slightly different. What is it? Checks don't auto fail on a 1, but rolls do. Which is one of those fun lawyer-ese speaks tucked amongst all of the rules of Pathfinder, where it's like, oh, if you're making an attack roll or a combat maneuver roll, you will auto-fail on a 1 or you auto-succeed on a 20. If you're making a check, like a skill check or a strength check, if you still pass on a 1, you're fine, but you don't auto-pass on a natty 20.
I think that's a fun way to do it, because it can come into things like, you're looking through a library and you roll and you get a crit. Doesn't mean that you're going to absolutely find that thing. As a skill, like, oh, you're trying to search. I actually like that a lot better. Like, sometimes you have to hit a DC, or maybe it's very unlikely, and just because you rolled a nat 20. Which I think there's a lot of discourse, actually, of that, like, does a nat 20 automatically succeed on checks? I've seen that even with, wasn't there stuff, like, play stuff coming out with the 1D&D thing, where it was talking about, like, crits on skills and so forth. Which I think, as a player, you roll that nat 20 and you want, the best thing to happen. Because that's, it's a nat 20. That's what you're conditioned to think is the best thing. And to not have it then work on certain checks than others can be disappointing, I guess. But I think from a more logical standpoint, I enjoy the idea of it's not an automatic success on those skills.
Yeah, I'm in your boat personally. I think I ran into this thought problem of like, you can't have skills auto fail on a 1. That doesn't make sense, because I've watched these like incredibly talented Olympic like beam gymnasts, and are you telling me there's a 5% chance that their like arm just flies off and they go like careening into a wall? You've definitely seen them had like bad landings and stuff, but they pretty consistently always perform amazingly. And if they have a bunch of points in that skill, it's to be assumed that even their natural 1 and my natural 1 should not look the same. Like
absolutely. And there are situations where you nat 1 on something, and even with your modifier, you would pass, but because that is kind of the rule of the system, it's like, all right, well, now I'm stuck. That sucks.
Yeah, and like I feel especially bad for it when I think about things like stealth, which is a really tough skill. Where it's like, oh, if I have plus 14 to stealth, on a 1 I get a 15. Most people just don't notice me. But if you play in the system where a 1's a failure, it's like, okay, even though I rolled a 1, which is a 15, and the paladin rolled a 7 with their modifiers is a 5, technically I should get worse than them now because my dice number was bad.
Yeah, and it really does, you are supposed to be trained in these things, and you're supposed to be competent people. It makes it feel like you're not competent when you roll a nat 1 and you automatically fail. And it's always, I feel like as well, it's always described as a fault on your part.
Correct.
even
And
though
that's
you're competent.
yeah. And I really dislike that feeling of doing that to my players. Like I've really tried to take that pull off of them of like, hey, you rolled a bad, your dice rolls bad, and your check was good enough to kind of pull this off.
Mhm.
A lot of times where I'll instead use, like on the podcast, if they roll a 1 on a stealth, I'll still describe it as being very stealthy, but this is when your mom calls and your cell phone
Oh
goes
no.
off. So it's trying less to say like, hey, you did fail the check. It's not because you're an incompetent person and you just banana peeled into a wall and then fell into a pile of pots that were hanging there. It's going to be, you did everything right, but this thing was against you. That's, the dice represent so much more
Yeah.
than just like a success fail on a direct line, right? Like you don't actually get stabbed with 12 swords before you like, oh no, my hit points are running low. All these swords are in me. So yeah, I feel, I mean, I love Pathfinder 2e system for it of, 5 over is your success, 10 over is your critical success.
Mhm.
Because that leads very well into the competence thing we're talking about with, a fighter in these early levels fighting goblins might roll that 20 and get that crit and they feel really good about it. But then they come back at level 8 and a new group of goblins jumps out. Give them that sweet anime scene, right? Where they swing their sword 3 times and 8 goblins all fall over and it's nothing because they crit everywhere. Yeah, I feel like D&D is definitely starting to lean more a little bit into doing those extremes, right? Like, oh, did you roll a crit? Here's a bunch of stuff that goes off, and you get really big crits, and you get kind of big fails, and that doesn't appeal to me as much as I don't want to have a GM tell me that, like, oh, you rolled a natty 1 on your diplomacy check. I guess your character started spewing slurs, and you're like, what? No, that's not what I want. Let's like, oh my god, no, my character would never do that. And like, well, you failed it somehow. It's like, oh, critically failed it.
Yeah, no, and it can take away from some player agency as well. I mean, I actually played a one shot of Kids on Brooms actually, and part of the thing is there's different levels of success depending on how far like far away you are to the DC. So let's say the DC's 15 and you roll a 15, that matches up completely. But if you roll 5 under the DC, this happens. Like, oh, a minor failure occurs, or if you get, like, let's say 5 above it, it's like you were able to complete this successfully and have a bonus. What I actually did in that system was, because it kind of, had that tiered level of success and failures, when my players would roll, I would tell them, here's the base thing. You're able to succeed with a small bonus. I tell them that and then tell them to describe what happens. To actually give them more of that player agency of, what would your character do to give yourself that advantage? Because I find that more interesting than the GM just being like, you're able to succeed and now you have an opening on this side. I find, and my players actually were able to come up with some really interesting scenarios where they set up advantages and bonuses to the other characters and players because they described it in a certain way, and they also knew more of what they wanted to accomplish in those moments where they were rolling. Did I want to bring down this troll? And with bringing down that troll, maybe the advantage is he's stunned and we can now all run away. Or did you want to fly away from the troll and you were able to do that really well and you decided to grab something that you needed, or even be able at the last minute grab one of your companions to then all get away at the same time if they were falling behind. So things like that I find very, very interesting, which is why I like the tiered success and failure systems in general versus, one extreme or the other.
Very much. I like the way you described doing that as well. Of putting that agency back in the player's hands is super important, and also I feel like it makes them all little GMs as well, right? Like they're giving them that agency takes that much more off of you to have to describe everything, right? Like if you're as a GM, we're kind of the Matrix, right? Like we're all of it. We're every NPC. We generate all the stuff. But when players have agency, they create the world for us to work with, and becomes less a narrator and more of a player.
Exactly. And you can still be surprised by things. And that's what I loved about it as well. And as well, I, especially in Kids on Brooms, is like a whole, magic school and stuff. And so I didn't know how they wanted to approach how their magic even, manifest. So even in that way, even that small way of flavor, giving them the control in that moment to describe what happens lets them decide, how does my magic actually show up? We ended up going with kind of a glyph system like in the Owl House, because literally everyone I was playing with loves that show. So they all ended up describing their magic in that way, and that wouldn't have happened if I just assumed, oh, we're playing something closer to like my assumption was playing something closer to Harry Potter, with wands and saying the names of the spells and stuff like that. Those would have been two completely different systems of magic, but completely different scenarios. But I gave those players those agencies in those times to actually, what is my character like? Even in just a one shot, that was like one of the most memorable one shots for all of these people, because it was like, I got to do so many things. I got to actually I got to make my character into something so much more than one shots that they've played in the past let them be able to do. Which I again, personally, I find that so much more fun to make those experiences something that is going to be extremely memorable and that you're going to have a lot of fun with. It's more fun to describe how you're going to kick this troll's ass versus me telling you how you kick this troll's ass.
Very much so. Yeah. No, it's really fun to see other people get creative with. I kind of feel like with your Lego set, right? As a GM, like you have all the parts and pieces and you put them out there for them. But it's really fun to watch them build their own thing out of those and be like, I made this. And you're like, that's great. Awesome. Let's do that.
I'm so proud of you. That as well. That's actually some of my favorite things. I've personally read a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games. That's a system that I really enjoy personally. And every time reading through those games, one of the things will always be a fan of your players. It's so simple, but be a fan. You want the best for them. You want to be like their cheerleader. Like, you want them to succeed. And I think that's kind of breaking the mold of the, GM versus player ideology that's been within the tabletop space for a really long time, because that's how it used to be played. Being the fan of your players makes you think of it differently and approach it much, much more differently. That I think is fantastic.
And I think it's healthier too.
It is.
Yeah, you all walk away from the game that night or that session, and everyone can reflect back on parts they enjoyed, and it's fun to be included in that, right? Like we see those posts all the time of tell your GMs thank you or this kind of thing, and possibly even more important than saying thank you is just becoming part of that game, right? Letting those players have that agency, so the GM gets to hear a story. Like I get to hear now like what you think happened, and if all your players are doing it right, it should feel very much that there's no one person in control of it.
Yeah, it's just, again, it is just that one player with slightly different roles. They're just everyone else. they're all the other they're all the NPCs, and they guide you through. But yeah, it should feel more balanced, I guess. It's not, you outweigh the opinions of the players. It's, you're all creating this story together, and it's a great experience.
Yeah, it's. I think that's one of my favorite compliments I've ever gotten from one of my players, and this is a player I've been playing with for 20 years. And he was a very kind compliment of just, you're a very fair DM. I just really enjoyed that because it completed kind of what I want of the table feels fun because I'm keeping it all where everybody's at the same level of enjoying themselves, and that's what I want, right? Like I want them to. I am a big fan of my players, but that does mean I do have to put things in their way that they may not enjoy to make the story more fun.
Exactly. There's a difference between you doing things to the characters and players because you're mad at them, or just putting things in the story just because that makes it a more interesting experience.
Yeah, it's why I'm also a big fan of like roll in front of your players. That way,
Hmm.
the dice are who you can all kind of look at, right? As
Hmm.
everything could go correctly, but like, all right, you made an awesome argument. They believe you for the most part. They're gonna roll a sense motive,
Hmm.
and they rolled a nat 20. That's why they don't believe your bluff. You're whatever. And it's not me rolling behind the screen. It's us watching the dice fall together and be like, shoot, I'm really sorry. This guy just doesn't believe you. And then they can be like, damn, okay, I need to come up with something different. Ah, crap, guys.
Yeah, it's those moments of tension. That's honestly actually what I miss a lot from. I've been playing online since pandemic stuff. I have not played in person since, and that's something I do miss from playing in person. Those moments when you're all looking at whoever's rolling and seeing what gets rolled, and then seeing what you can do from there, and like, and if it's a nat 20 or if it's a nat 1. Like, those are some really memorable moments, but that is something I really do miss because it's very it's like kind of it brings the group together
Hmm.
in those moments where playing online, I think, is a completely viable way. I enjoy playing online, all of that, but there's those moments of disconnect because you're not all there together. You're not all seeing what that person rolls at that time. You're not all there looking, unless you play with like cameras or something like that. You're not all there looking at each other while you're role playing out these scenes. And again, I enjoy playing online, but there are those very sweet moments in person that I think builds the group together really strong.
100% agree. And I am in the same boat of it's been a long time since I've done in-person play. We do all our stuff online as well, which is very fun, and I'm glad I get to still do it. But
Mhm.
especially because one of my players lives in Hawaii, another one's in Texas, one's in the Philippines.
Yeah, it makes
Um,
it so much more easier.
yeah, but I do miss the sitting around the table and watching people roll dice, or watching people hate to roll dice, depending on the outcome.
Exactly. Like maybe that role will uh end up with you getting eaten by a monster, but like it's still fun.
Yeah.
No, but that's awesome. And I think a little bit on back on track with the whole Pathfinder things. I'm curious, what has your general experience been running Pathfinder as a game master?
As a whole, I'd say it's almost entirely positive.
Hmm.
Like, say, we're very comfortable homebrewing and altering things, so a lot of the times when we run into parts of the game that we don't enjoy, or we see what maybe the intent was, but we don't think it fits our table, then we'll adjust it accordingly. But
Hmm.
I would say that I have enjoyed my time so far playing Pathfinder First Edition. I'm still using it in homebrew games at the moment. So it's something I like, but I definitely will be starting to look around a bit at other systems to kind of goof around with. I have one friend who every month GMs a different rule system, so we all kind of get to
Oh, that's awesome.
we all get to kind of try new things all the time. So I don't feel the impetus to have to change my system, since I do get
Mhm.
access, and my players, we all get access to multiple other systems. Um, but until I see somebody I think that really stands out, Pathfinder is kind of where I'm. I hate to be that old grognard who's like, I'm not, I'm not never going to move on, but I enjoy playing it enough that I don't see a change that I need to make yet, for my GMing style.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think it's completely fair to have that like stable system that, if it's just the thing that you go back to. Like even if you're playing other games, you're going to go back to that. And that's I think with a lot of people that I've seen recently that tends to be D&D or Pathfinder or something like that. That's the system that, most comfortable in. And I think that's completely fair, but that's awesome that you've had a great time with DMing Pathfinder first edition. For all these years as well, because it's been 12. And if you can last 12 years playing the same system and still have fun and enjoy it and new ways to reinvent it and have a great time, I think that's a great system for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a few more things that I'd like to ask, but I think we're starting to get close to the end point here. So my first question is, do you have any specific advice for new DMs wanting to run a game of Pathfinder First Edition?
If you find yourself wanting to run Pathfinder First Edition and you're a new GM, I 100% recommend recommend doing a really basic adventure first. Maybe grab like a small adventure path that's levels 1 through 3 or something. Just
Mhm.
there's so much to like the iceberg of stuff in that system that it's completely fine and fair and probably smart to start a little bit with training wheels and understand that all of you are going to make mistakes. You're all going to make ridiculous characters. Half of them may not work and some of them will die, guaranteed. But the fun will be the second or third game you play, right? When you play it again, you know a little bit more. Not saying you won't have a blast the first time, but understanding that there's enough things there that can go awry that's just kind of fun to it's fun to learn with your players at the same time.
Absolutely. Actually, does Pathfinder First Edition have a starter set of any kind?
I believe it does. I do believe it does have a starter set. I don't know if you'd still be able to get them because they don't produce the materials for that anymore.
Hold on, I'm looking this up. I'm very curious because I found more and more that starter sets are insanely valuable to learning new games.
Yeah, on the actual looks like Paizo website, as well as on Amazon, there is an old time Pathfinder beginner box that you can play, which probably wouldn't be a terrible idea. I just wonder how available those are. But yeah, it's not hard, I think, to learn the game. It just gets hard to keep track of everything. So, best advice is make a lot of mistakes and just enjoy the failures with your players. So,
I love that so much. I think that's the best for any time that you're going to try any sort of TTRPG or really anything. Have fun making mistakes. Is there anything else that you would like to mention specifically about Pathfinder First Edition before we fully wrap up?
it's a game that's been around for a while now. So, for new players and old players alike, there are tons of resources made by other players to have access to. But remember to take it all with a grain of salt and stick to the most important part, which is having fun. There's a lot of build guides and rating systems, and there's so much out there that since it's been around for so long that people have statted out and rated everything to a kind of cold mechanical amount of precision. So don't let anyone tell you you're making a bad character as long as you're having fun with it. It's part of the GM. The GM's role is to tell the story and make sure that the story works with the players. So every table knows it. No character is in a vacuum. Every table's different.
Exactly. Yeah, do whatever fits the best.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that is fantastic. And I think we come to the final question here, which is a bit of a loaded question, a little bit hard, but I'm curious of the answer. Why do you love Pathfinder First Edition?
The solid base of rules allows for a lot of creativity that's all done within ranges that all the players can expect.
Mm-hmm.
And with the amount of creative options between character builds, feats, as well as the amount of fluff and crunch that's all been put to make this game, I feel that there's just a wide amount of stories that have not yet been told or things that we have not done yet that could still be explored and my players want to explore. So I think, at least for myself, I'm not done having fun with it yet.
That is perfect. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Definitely, I need to. I mean, again, I need to try out every game, but I'm very curious to actually check out Pathfinder, like first edition, and explore it, especially to even get a glimpse of some of the, old school style of play as well. So I'm very, very curious and very excited to actually try this game out and see what it's all about, what it does have to offer. Because just from what you've said, like, you still have many stories to experience within this game, and you've been playing for 12 years. That's amazing. So I absolutely have to check Pathfinder. Oh my god, sorry. Check Pathfinder First Edition out. But seriously, thank you so much, Jeph, for coming on and talking about Pathfinder First Edition and also just general TTRPG stuff. Because
Yeah.
this has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for making the time to chat.
Yeah, it's been an absolute blast.
Next time I do another little like Pathfinder 1E roundup for people, I'll send you a message, see if you want to join up.
Oh, absolutely. That would be amazing. I've actually had quite a few people offer like opportunities to play some games. I'm like, that would be really awesome. So I would absolutely be down for that. But yeah, no, seriously, thank you for being awesome. And as well, if you are listening to this episode, thank you for, getting to this point. I really appreciate it. If you really want to start checking out Pathfinder First Edition, I mean, there's a lot of ways to start that journey through, looking at YouTube videos, finding resources online, but consider listening to Jeff's podcast, Big Campaign Stories, to start seeing what Pathfinder is all about. Even though they do start in more of a homebrew setting, it gives you a base idea of what you can do and the experiences of Pathfinder. So please go check out the Big Campaign Stories podcast. Just why wouldn't you? You should just do it. Jeff's awesome. So yeah. But yes, thank you again, Jeph, for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening. And that is the end. So
yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the RPG Goblin. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a review for the RPG Goblin wherever you listen to your podcast, because it really helps keep this podcast going, and just the support that everyone has given me so far towards this project has been absolutely amazing. So I just want to thank you so much, and make sure that if you have been enjoying the RPG Goblin, just make sure to support us. Once again, thank you so much to Jeph from Big Campaign Podcast for coming on and talking about Pathfinder and TTRPGs with me. It was absolutely fantastic. And if you want to explore Pathfinder First Edition more, especially through an actual play podcast, please listen to Big Campaign Stories. It's a great podcast, especially if you want to start exploring some of the homebrew options for Pathfinder First Edition. So make sure to listen to them, Big Campaign Stories, anywhere that you find your podcasts. They're also on Twitter at Big Campaign Pod, and on Instagram, I believe, as well. The next episode of the RPG Goblin will be coming out June 30th, and I'm so excited because if you are a fan of Borderlands, the DLC of Borderlands, Dragon Keep, and or Tiny Tina's Wonderland, then you are absolutely going to love the game that we are talking about next week, which is Bunkers and Badasses, basically a TTRPG that is supposed to run exactly like Dragon Keep and Tiny Tina's Wonderland, and I love it so much. I bring on Riley from Friend and Foe Adventure Co., which is a Bunkers and Badasses actual play, and we end up talking about this game and breaking it down, and also creating a custom gun, because that's really cool. So if that sounds great, make sure to keep your eyes and ears out for next episode, and I'll see you then.